but that first fire I've talked in 95, that was an amazing for learning experience for the visitors, for us, for sure, but also for the visitors, like people, they saw the smoke, they were canoeing, and that place smoked for 2 months. So right at the peak of the summer season. Mm-hmm. So that was a great, and it's along a canoe route where lots of people goes to visit like some falls further into the park. So lots of people canoe along that lake. And that was a big tool to, we put like floating signs, and we had sometimes interpreter on site, like explaining to people, okay, this is what we're doing and all that.
Yeah.
So we used that opportunity to explain to the visitors what was happening and why we were doing it. It's not a wildfire. This is us putting fire back.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christoph, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now, today's episode, all about prescribed fire. I spoke to a couple of folks at Mauricie National Park in Quebec, all about the prescribed fire program they have going on in that park for the last 30 years. So lots of cool stuff going on there. They've been learning as they go. They've have a really interesting situation that they were given when the park was first made. The history there is very muddled. Lots of crazy stuff going on. Like, I mean, obviously a big colonial impact, industrial impact. There was logging from like 1850s and even before then, a lot of selective logging, not a lot of clear cuts. All that for over 400 years, not to speak to the First Nations people that were there before then, managing and burning the landscape, right? So, a really interesting history there, and interesting to get into how they want to, what kind of forest do they want to get to? Because they're 400 years away from the last quote unquote natural thing, right? So yeah, this is their story. 30 years of fire in Mauricie National Park. The two people I spoke to, the first one is
Michel Thériault.
Hopefully I said your last name right, Michel. I apologize if I butchered it. All these Anglophones screwing things up. He is a restoration specialist for the National Fire Management Division of Parks Canada. And, he's very much heavily involved in the prescribed fire. So he speaks very in depth about the history and the tactics and all that kind of stuff. Really, really cool. And the other person we spoke to, who only comes in at the very, very end, but she's the one I first contacted, she emailed me, Elisabeth Caron. And she is the public relations and communications officer there. And she spoke to, the public relations, right? How did the public handle all of a sudden being told that you shouldn't be burning to, oh, this is good fire. We need this type of fire on the landscape, right? So she spoke about that right near the very end. So you won't hear much of her for the first hour or so. But it was an awesome podcast. I know you guys are going to like it. Lots of cool stuff to listen to and think about. So, sponsors, Wes Fraser is the number one sponsor once again for 2022. Without them, this would not be possible. Thank you, Wes Fraser, for all of your support over the years. Greenlink Forestry is another sponsor. Been with me since the beginning. Again, wouldn't be possible without them. Thank you, Greenlink. And Damage Timber is the last sponsor. Check out their website, damagetimber.com, to find out what they do. They put damaged timber in your kitchen. So you can check that out for yourself. It's really cool. Damagetimber.com. Put in Your Forest 10 at checkout to get 10% off. And without any further messing around, let's dive into this conversation all about prescribed fire and the history of. Here we go. So in Mauricie National Park, when I got the email from you, Elisabeth, with the story map and what you guys are up to, 30 years of fire and all that, I was really excited because I have not had the opportunity to speak to anyone in government about this kind of thing, about prescribed fire and getting fire back on the landscape. That's something that we know that's been missing for 100 years through fire suppression and the loss of cultural burning of the landscape. So I thought this was a cool opportunity. I wanted to start, Michel, with you before we get into the Mauricie and fire management and all that good stuff. Why are you doing this? Why fire management? Why is this something that you've spent your life doing?
Yeah, so I did my background from university was in biology. So I did a degree in wildlife management first.
Okay.
And then I came back in my region where I'm from, in Saguenay region, to do a master degree in more forest ecology. That program was about renewable resources, and there was all kind of stuff happening. And one of my colleague, another student, was doing his master on a fish population in the Saguenay River. And at that time, Parks Canada has just created this new and the first marine park in the system. And he was in connection with some of the Parks Canada staff managing the park for his project. And that's where I hear about Parks Canada doing competition staffing position. There was quite a bit of position. We're back in the early 90s with Brian Mulroney and the Green Plan government. So it was a good period, like lots of money, lots of job creation with parks. And that was the beginning of the prescribed fire program pretty much with Parks Canada. Some stuff happened before that, but a big boom in that in many parks.
Right.
And this is knowing that I did apply on that competition and started working with Parks Canada with some background in fire ecology, in forest ecology and fire ecology, because my project was connected with it was about landscape, explaining the landscape following fire, but no real background, practical background about fire suppression or wildfire. I've never been a firefighter to pay my university, nothing like that. So everything else was totally new when I got that job. And La Mauricie was just starting his prescribed fire program, and they had done the first prescribed fire. They put in the fall of 1991. And I just arrived after that, like later in that fall.
Okay.
And yeah, I got the job, and I've been pushed to training one after the other for the first few years. And most of the training happened in Western Canada at the Hinton Fire Training Center in Alberta.
Yep.
So starting from scratch in terms of fire suppression and fire use, fire behavior. So it was quite an exciting period because everything was new, everything to build from zero.
Yeah. No, that is exciting. That's an interesting pathway into it. So you originally you had a passion and a desire to do the wildlife thing. So this fire thing was it came in secondary. So that must have been an interesting connection. You start to see how everything is balanced and interrelated. I like that. It probably brought a different perspective than a lot of your colleagues, I assume.
Yeah, sure. And I grew up in Saguenay region is quite remote in north of the province of Quebec. So, and our family, we always had a summer cottage or fishing and hunting cabin. So I grew up pretty much in the bush. As soon as school was finished, we were moving to the cabin for the whole summer. And so my whole life, being kids and teenager, we spent a lot of time in the forest for fishing, hunting, and all kind of stuff that kids play. This was a big playground. So it was just a continuity of what I've always done. So it was kind of a dream job. Like I grew up watching the Mutuelle d'Omaha, for those that are old enough to remember those programs on TV. And then I was supposed to start first working in the spring of 1992. And they phoned me to start maybe like few months earlier. So the plan was to complete my thesis in the winter and start in the spring. And then finally I got a phone call and asking me if I was available to start next week. And so I just asked what's going to be the task in the winter, because my plan was really wanted to finish the master. And she said, we have this project with a PhD student studying black bear. So you're going to go visit the bear in there then during the winter. So no way
That's
you
awesome.
refuse a job like that. Okay, I put the thesis aside and I jump on the opportunity. So my first winter with Parks was fully working on that black bear study project. It was an amazing job. And then the spring came and the real fire ecology position, the work started. But it was a pretty neat start with a job like that.
It is. Yeah, that's I think it seems like most people in fire, they get into it because they're just like, well, it's fire. It's cool as hell. Like, why wouldn't I want to be involved in forest fires, right? So it's cool to hear your perspective from it. That definitely changes, I imagine, your approach. That's cool. And it's cool to see the interrelation there, right? How all of a sudden now you're approaching fire from an ecological standpoint right off the bat, rather than getting into it as a firefighter or something and just being excited about the adrenaline and the fire and the I'm a hero kind of thing, right? I know that, you get that kind of just fun. It's just fun, right? So it's interesting that you started with that ecological mindset and have kind of developed the fire understanding after that. That's awesome. So yeah, let's get into the park. So Mauricie, or even just Parks Canada in general, when and why did Parks Canada realize that fire needed to be reintroduced?
I think pretty much the 80s were the years where most of the fire science really exploded. In terms, a lot of things happened. There has been stuff before that, but I think the 80s were really timing, at least in Park, with all the science has been integrated, and then we start considering, okay, conservation is not just about putting a bulb of glass above the landscape and stop hunting, fishing, logging, and the job is done. We just realize, okay, no, there's natural processes that needs to happen and keep happening.
Right. It's the preservation versus conservation thing.
Exact. And then 80s were the years to really realizing that, and then kind of time for integrate some of the science, and then slowly, I think the first Banff National Park. That was the place where they were the first ones implementing prescribed fire with a guy like Cliff White even in the 80s, and but really the 90s were the years where it really started in many parks.
Right.
And La Mauricie was the only place in pretty much east of Ontario doing, or at least in Quebec for sure, doing prescribed fire. And we're still pretty much the only places in Quebec. So it was quite new, and there was some sensitivity locally and provincially about doing that. But
well, no kidding, right? You spent the last 70 years being like, hey, don't light fires when you're not supposed to light fires. Put it out. Be terrified. And then you're like, hey, guys, we're going to light fire. Like, what the hell?
No, exactly. We're looked at kind of crazy. But we always had amazing support, even from our counterpart from the province, even from SUPFER, who is the provincial agency for fire prevention and suppression. They jumped in the boat right at the beginning, even though it was not their mandate to do that. They were still doing a product like forest for a timber value, but we've got the support of those guys, and they helped us developing the program and getting the backup if anything happened in terms of fire control.
Right.
But slowly we started slow. The first project in the early 90s were about opening, like removing plantations. Like the park has been created in 1970, and there has been quite a bit of logging activities before that, and some part of the park even were like farmlands from the early beginning of the century. And one of the big logging company bought back those lands and planted it with white and Norway spruce. So the park decided to get rid of those plantations and replace them by natural forest.
Gotcha.
And we kind of used the fire. This is where we start experimenting to use a fire, like burning slash, basically, at the beginning. So starting from was an area with the province has some experience, and we start moving, not logging the whole stand and keeping some standing trees and burning slash plus get the fire going into the canopy to kill those spruce. And then slowly we moved into the pine restoration program after a few years of, I would say, getting us ready to jump into something different. So it has been a slow process, and lots of cooperation with our partners from the province, with researchers to answer questions, and lots of public communication for visitors in the park, and also the neighbors and stakeholders and even the population around, because it was quite a shock for everybody.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah, people aren't used to it, right? Like, what do you mean you're going to start lighting fires? So could you speak at all to the mindset behind doing prescribed fire for ecosystem restoration and ecosystem health versus like I'm trying to figure out how and why we came to the realization, like what was the catalyst that was like, hey, we need to be doing this not for fire hazard reduction, but actually to restore these landscapes. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, sure. I think it came from science, from when we started understanding that we were missing part of it, and one of the big start was all the research and studies we've done in the 80s and even in the 90s. We did keep doing a lot, understanding what was the fire regime, what was the fire history in the park. So we've got all that. We like I said, worked a lot with university and our Forestry Canada or CFS partner in Quebec, and just really get the basic knowledge of what was about the history of that landscape, and
sure.
And even though the park has been, like I said, heavily logged before creation, I think the industrial logging began in 1850 in the St. Maurice River watershed. Despite like 100 and more than 100 years of logging, it has never been like clear-cut way of things. The park, like pretty much park creation started, they were still doing, before that, it has always been like selective cutting. So we end up in 1970, when after park creation, with pretty much the same species in the forest, like there was not in the same proportion, but we're not, there has been no tree species that disappeared because of logging. They were just like less pine, less pine, more of others, but and probably less conifer, because sawmill was mostly looking at conifers, so maybe likely more deciduous, but they were all still there, and there was a way to manage to go back or try to recover or bring. And the first one was the white pine, because of the importance of that tree and the fact that it has been so much selectively logged that we wanted to get it back.
Gotcha. So that's a point we should make, actually. So what kind of forests are we talking about in the Mauricie? What are the species that are there? What's the substrate like? Like, what's the terrain like? Just to give people an idea, because I eventually want to get into a discussion about exactly what you were talking about. You were kind of giving us the breakdown of the history, right, of why the park is like it is now. I want to get into eventually the fire management's role in, like, what is the end result? What are you aiming for, right? Like, what baseline are you using as something to model after? But before we get to that, what does the park look like? What are the species? What's all that stuff?
We're in the Canadian Shield, so it's not like the Appalachian forest with it's the granite stuff, and it's a rolling hills kind of landscape with lots and lots of lakes and creeks and rivers. So it's still for visitor, and even before that has been heavily used for. It's easy to travel by canoe routes with some small portages between lakes, and so it's really a canoe area. It looks a bit like Algonquin Park in Ontario.
Okay.
And it's mixed wood forest. So some like conifer patches. It's a big pizza basically. So deciduous sugar maple, beech, sugar maple, yellow birch stands for the deciduous ones, with likely less conifer component in those stands, like those big white spruce are not so much there because of, like, they have been selectively logged. So maybe likely more conifer than they used to be in the before industrial logging.
Okay.
And then with conifer and red spruce stands, red spruce, which is kind of there's not so much remaining in Quebec, so this is why there's some importance of maintaining those red spruce stands. So this red spruce is more, it's not like black spruce, with like really fire dependent. Red spruce is more, you can survive under the shade. So fire has a role on that landscape for sure, and but it's not the boreal. We're not in the boreal forest. It was just at the edge of the boreal, so it's still a mixed wood forest and lots of pine. But pine, it's not. We often think about white pine, those big pure white pine stands, but they are more. They make a super canopy above, like a mixed wood forest. That's what it is most of the time. There is some like almost pure pine stands, often along the lake shore or on the best side, or on the rock cliff where they can grow there. The
dry slopes,
yeah. But most of the area, it's more like you should flew over. You think it's a pine forest, but if you go underneath, you have those big trees like a super canopy, but underneath there's another layer of a mixed wood forest.
Gotcha. So So how much of the result of the way it is now is a result of, obviously you talked a lot about logging. So obviously logging had a big role to play in what the forest in Quebec looks like around there. What about the loss of fire in there in relation to the logging? How did that change the way that you would expect it to be?
I think we have to like fire history of the park. We've seen we know that, like, even from charcoal sediments in the lakes, and we started a brand new study again this year with a PhD student. We'll go over it again, and maybe we'll get other set of data. But we have those kind of data, and there has always been fire. There has been quite a bit of big fires in the 1920s, and it's kind of coincided with the people like cleaning land for farm. So
homesteading,
lots of big fires, like they were burning piles for when they were opening the lands, and like 1922, 1923, two amazing huge fires that like took off a big chunk of the park. So there has been a period in the early 1900 where there has been an impact of like fire escape from land clearing.
I think that's the same stories across Canada too, right? Yeah. Like every province has I know Alberta, Saskatchewan have the 1918 super fire that was hundreds of, like you said, slash piles from homesteading that just took off and burned some like 2 million hectares or whatever. So I'm sure every province probably has a similar story just from that time period, right? There was no fire suppression and there was a lot of people on the landscape doing whatever the hell they wanted to do, and things got out of hand.
Exact. And then let's say that's probably since the 50s. Then we can see that we're efficient in terms of fire suppression. But the area was also owned by a logging company. Basically, they were crown line, but pretty much given to the company for management. So in Quebec, those logging company, they were the one who started their own prevention agency. It was by region, and they did it here. They had fire tower and all that, and the territory, the park was also used, the whole area, for fishing and hunting club. There was some of the most famous fishing club were in the park. Were even using even more than the park. There were a huge area. And the members were mostly like businessmen from States and Montreal that were coming, and that was giving some jobs to the local guys for guiding and all that.
Right.
So there was an interest in protecting, and lots of people on the landscape in summer, like watching, and they were taking care of what they were doing, basically. So pretty much fire exclusion since the 50s up until park creation, and after that even. So we pretty much stopped fire since 1950s, and we're still doing that. Although in our fire management plan, we can actually let, or under certain condition, if the conditions are right, we can manage differently a wildfire. But it's mostly through prescribed fire that we started to reintroduce. But we're not at the level of what the fire was in the back. And this is bring us to the baseline. What are we trying to reproduce or coming back? So basically, yes, we use the pre-industrial forest as a baseline. We have quite a bit of a good understanding of what it was. We did one of the main study we work, and it has been done all over the province of Quebec. A student who did his master degree, he went back to the surveyor notebooks that are kept at the provincial archive. So he put white gloves and photocopy those stuff, and it's they were quite a bit precise, I think, and they were pretty much. And he went back to the first survey that has been done before logging, and they were pretty much like marking the land, the main division, like county, and that sort of things. And then they were also surveying and listing the trees by proportion, basically. And these guys went back on the same survey transect and get the picture of what's there now. And
I think we had the same thing. Was it the Mountain Legacy Project stuff? Those photos? Are you familiar with that?
No, it was really like just a notebook that those guys had in there. So it's written manuscript. It's a list of, usually they were listing the tree species by the importance. So the first one was the most important, and
I see. One. And you said they took a photo as well, though.
No, there was no photo.
There was no photo.
We're looking at survey before 1850. So
I see.
Even from 17 and end of the 1700s. So gotcha. Some are quite far way back. So that's super interesting because now you have kind of a picture of the he did the whole region, St. Maurice, so not only the park, bigger than the park. And they did it in Ottawa River Valley region and everywhere in the province. And it came up with, that showed up that the Mauricie River watershed was probably the second biggest reserve of white pine.
Okay.
So Ottawa River was like, yes, the place. And then a bit more in South Shore of St. Lawrence River, but the other place where, and it has been the last one logged, but it was the second biggest reserve. This is why they were looking to get those trees.
Yeah.
It just needed to go over the falls, like I explained in Shawinigan.
Yeah.
So then we have a good understanding of how important was the pine and the other species, not only the pine, but in the landscape before. So it's quite a good, a unique kind of product because
really,
it goes
it is.
before the industrial logging. So it's really the best picture that we have of the forest.
Yeah.
And then we can compare it to now what we have. And so this is one of the baseline we're using. And in terms of fire regime, again, the indication we have of what was the fire frequency before industrial. So this is not necessarily what we try to reproduce because we will never be able to do that.
Right.
But like I said, lucky enough, all those trees are still there. There are maybe less trees and less pine than before, but they are still around and we can use it as a seedling tree.
Yeah.
So we set up some objectives in terms of pine representation, by example, and fire in the landscape in terms of hectares burned per year. And this is what we're using. So it's not aiming to reproduce what was happening before before we came as European here.
Yeah.
But it's kind of something we try to.
It's a reference.
Yeah, a reference. But
yeah.
And then we have to consider also now that we are there. There's neighbors, there's values at risk around. There's also climate change and new insects and disease to the trees. By example, white pine. There's a white pine blister rust. That's a disease that came. That's interesting. It came in New York on seedling of pine seedling that U.S. sent the seed in Europe because they didn't have the tree farms to produce them at the scale, and they wanted to replant some white pine because they had heavily logged those trees, and they get it produced in Western Europe, and the seedlings came back with the disease, which is just like native problem for Western Europe and for a really close cousin of the white pine. And
it's interesting that anytime you have some kind of disease like that, it's always our fault.
Yeah, exactly.
Agriculture, or we're moving stuff from one place to another, or we were trying to conserve and we did it wrong. Exactly. Yeah, it's funny. It's always us.
So it was a good, the reason to do it was great, but it came with it, and then it's since then there's no real solution for that. It's like heavily impacting white pine regeneration, so it's going into the seedlings, and any 5 needles pine, even in Western Canada, the same diseases affect your pines, so that's pretty sad, but that's a reality we have to live with. So it's probably just putting back the fire in the landscape. We would have a way better result without that, but now we have to deal with that. So we did.
It's part of the reality now. Yeah. I appreciate you pointing out the fact that, hey, we're not going to get back to what this was, right? That's not only is it not practical, but it's probably not the best thing, right? I've come to a realization personally just through these podcasts and that kind of thing that I feel like we have a romanticism where we're kind of thinking, okay, we got to get back to what this was. That's what we got to get back to, because that was the golden time of everything. But we fail to recognize that the pressures on the landscape and the population and the climate change and everything is different now. So I feel like people expect, like, oh, leave nature alone and it'll take care of itself. And it's like, well, sure, but we have the possibility and the consciousness, the ability to try to, the same as First Nations people did before Western culture did, right? To take all of these resources into consideration and try to balance them and manage them and keep them at some kind of steady, healthy state, rather than allowing all these big fluxes and everything. So I appreciated your honesty in saying, like, hey, yeah, we're making something new here, but this is something new that's going to try to support as many values, as many species, as many, things that we want in the landscape as possible, right? And that's including, like you said, biodiversity and water and I'm sure carbon capture and all kinds of things, right? So I think people have to, and I might be speaking to the choir here through this podcast, but I think we've come to the realization now that we can manage it appropriately for the values that we think we can manage for, right? Like, we shouldn't be just dependent on leaving nature alone to do its own thing. We can actually, because we have so much pressure on the landscape, we have to take a hand in it. And now I think we have the opportunity to do a really good job, especially when you look at, like I said, First Nations people and how they were able to do that at the scale that they did even before we did, right? So it's a cool opportunity to see that even though we're not going to have the forests of the past, we can use that as a reference for what maybe we can do in the future to support as many values as possible. So that's cool.
No, exact. And yeah, we have to be honest on that. And there's no way to go back. And it's not even a good idea, probably.
Right. Exactly.
And,
right.
And human always, like you said, you introduced the idea of First Nation. They've been like managing that landscape, North American landscape, and even everywhere in the world. But since the highs disappear, basically, so we just keep doing that. I think knowing what was there before when we came, we can use it as a reference and try to at least keep some of those, try to bring back some of those pine forests for the value for biodiversity, and also proactively thinking of what's going to be the condition in 50 years with the climate change. Now that's a big thing. Even we're working for red oak, and now we just knew that there is a new disease affecting red oak that making its way north from the state's border right now. I think it's pretty close to be in southern Ontario. So, we're doing prescribed fire to promote oak regeneration because it's closely also like pine, closely related to fire. But what's the future of that? So we just have to be cautious of and do our best with the knowledge we have, and we keep doing what like First Nation has done for thousands of years. It's managing the landscape. Yeah,
I think it's very cool because it's not like, if we were to walk away, say people were to walk away from North America and just kind of and let it take over, like, sure, the nature would figure itself out, but it's not going to be the same nature. That there's going to be things missing because the impact and the pressures on the landscape are different than they were. But it's a cool opportunity I think we have, and I think it's interesting to see what you guys have done with it and how you've tried to come to some kind of balance, right? It's awesome.
And we use prescribed fire as one tool, but it's we also did some like following prescribed fire, like treatment, lowing and pruning trees and thinning and even planting on areas where we did, like the fire did a good job, but because the pine has been logged, there is no or really limited number of seedling tree. So we even are actively planting some of the pine. So it's not just putting fire and say, okay, nature will do its own thing. We're proactively doing some other action in some areas.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, trying to do what we can to make it as beneficial for as many values as possible. That's very cool. So yeah, when fire started to be reintroduced, so right about the time when you came into La Mauricie, and when fire started to be introduced, how did you guys start? What was the focus, and then maybe where are you now, right? Like, what are you doing now? How has that changed over time, and what has informed those changes?
It changed a lot. Like I said, the beginning has been really about getting used to the technique, like using prescribed fire, and those like plantation removal, which was already in progress when we started with the program, was just okay. Oh, let's go and practice and use fire to remove the cones and make sure that a new, like a more natural forest will replace those plantation, and we won't have those Norway introduced spruce growing back. So there has been like a few years of practicing, and it's really 1995 that we move into the pine restoration program. It was like totally new. So we did a lot of research with like cooperation with universities around, and also we went and visit and share and contact our partners from Ontario, because Ontario has done quite a bit of prescribed fire for pine restoration before that. So we worked with them. We went there, visit, and we went into Petawawa Forest, Experimental Forest Center, which is closed, unfortunately now. And we did like the big guys, the big names of the time that were doing the research, and we went on the ground and see what they done and discuss with them and share, even with folks from US, just to learn from them what they have done, and then we try to adapt it to the local condition, which were a bit different than what those guys have in terms of fuel and climate and all that.
Yeah, of course.
So it has been like exciting time. So just adapting that. It was all about adaptive management, and we've made mistakes. We tried first to burn in summer, even though all those guys said that spring is the season. Like burning for pine, it's when it's burning in spring. It's pretty hard to get it burned in summer. Just for a safety, or like putting fire on the landscape in the springtime, where in eastern Canada there's no leaves in the trees and everything is available to burn. It was kind of a crazy idea. So just to share and get support from our partners, okay, let's try to do it in summer. And finally, burning in summer with all the green stuff and leaves and the deciduous and all that, it's pretty tough to get a fire going like in the forest floor in summer, unless you have like super dry conditions. And even then, it's more like a ground fire. And this is what happened with one of our first real pine big burn. Was 30 hectares along a lake with hose all around the perimeter that was not adjacent to water, because at that time we were like putting hose line all around that place. It was the beginning, no chance. It was super safe, and then lit it, and really minimal like flames on the ground, but it was quite a dry summer, and we're like beginning of August, and then we ignited with the ping pong balls, like ignition spheres.
Yeah.
And just basically we lit like thousands of little fire that went and dig into the duff layer.
Gotcha.
So these things kept burning for a month and a half.
Right.
So like prescribed fire, usually it's about getting it done, igniting, and within a 1 or 2 burning period, it's technically it should be done, and you're back into control and all that. So, but we just let it do its thing, because we realized, okay, there's no way to go and extinguish the whole thing. But after that, we decided, okay, no, we cannot afford to manage this at that stage of the program. We cannot afford to manage this for a month and a half with visitors and having smoke on the landscape for so long, right in the summer, in the peak of the visitor season.
Yeah.
And finally, that's at the end of those are the rain, like the fall rain in end of September that extinguish it. So
Of course.
almost 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
So we switched to the spring season, and we were able to sell the idea. Okay, it doesn't work in summer. Let's try to do it in the spring when it's the more risky season, because like I said, even the deciduous stands can burn.
It's dry. Yep.
And it went well, and we did use the spring season for many years, and finally, not a long time ago, we decided to go back to the summer season, but realizing that first burn that was seen at that time like operationally not a success. It was a success, but like not necessarily a good way to do it, because a lot of job to manage and all that.
It was messy and unpredictable.
Yeah. Ecologically, it did an amazing result. So, but it took kind of pretty much 20 years to end up and seeing those small pines reaching the 2 meters height, which is kind of our, we have kind of set objectives of getting 100 seedling of above 2 meters per hectare.
Okay.
And let's say if we achieve that, eventually we'll get some big trees that will survive in the stand. So end of the story, okay, this gives pretty good results. Also, we have good results in the spring, but even probably better results burning in summer, because probably getting a better seed bed and all that. And so we started back to reintroduce fire and use the summer burning windows, more recently. But at the beginning, like I said, we were selecting really small units, hose all around, lots of suppression.
Very cautious.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very concerned. Yeah.
And it's not that we're not cautious at this time, but
yeah. No, I'm saying you're reckless now. What are you doing?
But after all those years, we learned that, okay, maybe it's better to go bigger.
Yeah.
Use more the natural fuel break, more than we were using. Even use the deciduous stands in summer as a fuel break. And so one of the projects we've done in a big, 2,000 hectares patches of land, using mostly the big lakes as a boundary for the big unit. The first time we burned it, we had I don't know how many length of hose, and it took over 10 years to finally went over the unit and learn how to burn it and all that. And we ended up the last time not even laying, I think, maybe less than 20 length of hose on the whole thing, just to protect camping sites and camping site, that sort of thing. So
you figured out how it works, and you're less concerned. Yeah. That makes sense.
But a strategy like that would have never been accepted at the beginning.
Of course not. Not when you have the culture of fear around fire, right?
Exactly.
It takes time to build the confidence, and the confidence of the public as well. And absolutely. No, that makes sense.
But that first fire I've talked in 95, that was an amazing for learning experience for the visitors, for us, for sure, but also for the visitors. People, they saw the smoke, they were canoeing, and that place smoked for 2 months. So right at the peak of the summer season. So that was a great, and it's along a canoe route where lots of people goes to visit some falls further into the park. So lots of people canoe along that lake. And that was a big tool to, we put floating signs, and we had sometimes interpreter on site, explaining to people, okay, this is what we're doing and all that.
Yeah.
So we used that opportunity to explain to the visitors what was happening and why we were doing it. It's not a wildfire. This is us putting fire back. So really the program evolved a lot over the years. So we went from burning from pine, and then we started implementing prescribed fire for red oak regeneration. The other stage that happened maybe 10 years ago or 10, 15 years ago was to start bringing back the fire in the landscape and try to open patches of forest for habitat restoration and more broadly the biodiversity, and just get the fire back in the landscape. So because we realized that the park forest, even though it has been logged, it has always been selective logging. So no clear cut, never we never had clear cut. So the only natural process that opens the landscape is the windstorm.
Yeah, that's a very strange. The selective logging one is a very strange means of disturbance, isn't it? It doesn't. There's not really, besides disease, which doesn't spread fast. There's not a lot of natural examples of that kind of disturbance. So it's. I imagine it has created an interesting problem ecologically, as regards to the vertical structure of vegetation that you have and the way things have regenerated. Like you said, right? Pine and deciduous require, they're primary successional species. They require opening. They require sun. They can't just grow in the shade like a spruce can. So yeah, that's an interesting problem to have to deal with, for sure, to try to tackle that. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And then like set up prescribed fire that will open like canopy. It's not that easy. I mean,
no,
you need a lot more intensity, and that comes with a lot less chance of getting control of it. So it's a tough balance to try to build enough intensity to kill like the canopy and open it and get new habitat and young forest to restart and keep control at the same time. So it's a tough one.
I don't blame you. I imagine trying to pitch that to your boss and the government and being like, hey, yeah, so we are going to really light this thing on fire and we'll see what happens. I can see how that would be hard to pass. But yeah, it's a tough one to try and control something that's burning in the canopy, carrying through the canopy, and has some real momentum, right? Those are the types of things that we've been trained as a society to fear, right? So it's
exact. And even if when you're
and justly so,
and we have a chance like to work with season, with the fact that we have so much deciduous and we can use them in summer as a fuel break. And this is where it's really not easy, but almost no risk, because it's going to hit a deciduous stand eventually. And it's so patchy, and the landscape here is so patchy. But in summer, it's pretty hard to get it going, and even in the conifer, because of just the climate here and humidity. So the idea is to get bigger unit and play with various conditions, and usually we have multiple objectives now. I would say that our best success and the biggest patch of new forest in that park came from one of the prescribed fire and that escape or control back in 2003. It was in the spring, just a day or two before the green up happened. So we were done with the unit, a little pocket of green, the unburned stuff within, and it just 3 days after, just tried to keep in control of it, and then a big cold front, big strong winds event, and it took off and burned 400 hectares. But that day it was not a great thing, a great achievement. We're
a bit of a whoops.
Yeah. But looking to it today, it's pretty amazing. That's the only real big patch of like new forest. It's totally reset the forest, and there has been like even deciduous portion totally killed, and now it's coming back.
It's an interesting challenge that you guys have. You know what I mean? It's a very interesting challenge. It's unique, I think, to, I mean, I'm sure there's other places in Eastern Canada where it's like this, but I don't think we have, like here in Alberta or British Columbia or Saskatchewan, it's very homogeneous in that we just kind of, there's logging, but it's clear cutting, right? And there's not that odd vertical structure. It's just kind of, everything's just kind of the same age, right? So for us, I think the prescribed burning is different challenges, but it's not as unnatural, or unnatural is the wrong word. It's not as confusing, I think, of a situation that you guys have there, because it seems like there is so much heavily logged areas that it seems to have created a situation that's hard to navigate, hard to predict, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And brings challenges, but it also creates a lot of opportunity of using different season, doing different things. And
playing around
And
with it.
historically, our like spring was a season, like a fire season, but not, if we're thinking back, not so much lightning in the spring. That happened, but not that often.
Right.
So the core of the fire season in that landscape was in summer, where lightning strikes, hit like big trees, and probably fire smoldering for weeks, and then one day of big wind making a push. But
picks up.
And this is what we try to reproduce in the landscape for those. But it's still a work in progress. We're still learning how to do it, and
that's what I gather. It seems like it's been a very much a trial situation, right? Like, okay, well, this is what we know about fire. Let's try this, and okay, that worked kind of, but let's try this instead, and just very much a trial and error kind of thing, and figuring it out as you go. And I'm sure you guys have gotten it down to some pretty good ideas now at this point, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. And you cannot really fail in terms of like any fire you bring back on the landscape. But there has been a variety of severity and intensity and over the past, and seasonality in natural fires, and even fires that were put on the landscape by First Nations. So you cannot be wrong by putting fire back in the landscape. There is so few now.
As long as you don't burn the visitor center, I think you're okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about like, taking care of values at risk. But other than that, we did quite a bit of a few studies with looking at biodiversity for sometimes. But I remember one of that students that did his master on working on insects, like after fire in our hole. So he came before the fire, because what's great with prescribed fire, you know the date of the fire, you know when you're gonna lit it. So he came, did some put some insect traps, and he came back like 12 hours after and reset the traps and monitor insect recolonization after fire. And it was amazing, like a totally new community of insects came back, and within hours after the fire, and they were still smoking.
Right.
And those guys, they said that they are totally fire dependent. So what are they doing in the meantime? These probably came from another fire, not very far, but they need those burnt trees to survive, to do their life cycle. And you realize that it took about like 7 years after it's back to the initial stage, and the normal insects like are back. But for like few hours after the fire is there, until maybe like 5-7 years after, there's a whole new community of insects living there. So in terms of biodiversity, it's an indication. Okay, it's not just about the trees. It's more than that. We don't know. The thing is, we don't have a lot of like information about that, because like insects,
of course,
they are tiny, and we're not so interested in those guys. But and this is just
they're not a polar bear, that's for sure. Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. There's a lot of stuff like that we did over the time. We did study about the mice. Yeah, like mice population and the impact they have on pine seeds. Yes, over all the conifer in Canada. And this is again like
they're eating all pine seeds.
With university and the pine, they are like caviar. Conifer seeds. And this is, if you put like a selection of, that's what they did. They put a selection of all the seeds from all the conifer in Canada, and they go for white pine first. They are big seeds, and probably they are tasty, I imagine.
Right.
But we use it in salad, like
pine nuts. Yep. Yeah. Are those white pine?
No.
Disease?
I think
I don't even
know, but
I don't know what
and
those
I tasted. They are good. They taste good.
They're good.
And the kind of, let's say, enemy. We see that like
the mice. Sure.
The balsam fir, which is like the tree that grew up, that is taking the place of the pine, and really the big competitor for white pine seedlings is a balsam fir seedlings. The insect, they don't eat those seeds.
Interesting.
There's something in the probably in the envelope or whatever, and they just they take a bite and they know. They don't take that. So mice, and this is probably a key of the success of balsam fir. There's so much seedling because there's no predator on their seeds.
Yeah.
But this kind of stuff we learn through the
absolutely. Well, it's important. It's important. Like even the insect thing, right? Like the insect, I think people, like we said, like it was easy for human beings to ignore insects because there was caribou and grizzly bears and black bears and all these cool animals out there. But the insects they're the bottom, they're the baseline. Without the insects, you have none of that stuff, right? It's just the simple trophic cascade kind of situation. And if you got that direct information of like, hey, look at what insects are on the landscape now, and then immediately post fire, you have a completely different biota of bugs. That changes. It speaks very strongly to the importance of fire and how that drastically alters the landscape and the ecosystem. Right? It's very, very cool. I love that, and it's interesting. Like listening to you discuss the experience, right? The learning experience over the last 30 years of, okay, we're reintroducing fire and kind of learning as you go along the way. And I'm interested to know, because now as a Western culture, we're starting to understand and see more of the indigenous knowledge around burning, right? Like now I think it's pretty standard knowledge in the fire community that like, yeah, First Nations burned, they manage the landscape actively for a million different reasons, for berry production, for hunting, for all this kind of stuff. And I know some colleagues of mine would look at this situation and go like, listen, you guys, like Indigenous people have things to offer. We can help you. We can get you to where you want to be. And we have this knowledge that's been passed down, like you mentioned, Michel, since the ice melted, right? So it's now knowing this, now this is something that's become more common knowledge in the fire community. Is there been more of an effort or more opportunities to maybe seek out that collaboration with First Nations to maybe not only have their knowledge support the integrity of the park and the ecosystem in the park, but also as a reconciliation tool, you know? And I realize this is outside of your expertise, like you're the fire ecology guy, but the reconciliation is a different beast. But I think there's an interesting opportunity here. There's some interesting groups like the second season of the Good Fire podcast that I'm recording currently right now. There's a group in BC called Gathering Voices. And this is exactly the kind of thing that they're into, is connecting the right people and even with their example, the First Nations community there, they didn't have any fire knowledge holders really left in their community, right? But it was something that when they started to do, they started to feel that connection back to the landscape, and they're starting to learn it. And they brought in people from Australia to help them kind of get it back into their culture. And they've seen a lot of community, just the atmosphere has changed, right? Things are being supported, and their community seems to be healing in some way or another. And so I see there's an interesting connection here between, getting fire back on the landscape, getting the ecosystem healthy and sustainable and value driven again, but also supporting communities like First Nations communities who haven't been supported. And this might be an interesting way in which to collaborate. So I was just curious if this is something that you see, is being discussed, is maybe you see it as an opportunity, or what's going on with you guys in Quebec?
Yeah. I think in parks in general, it's really a conversation that is happening a lot at those days, and there is it's really depending on the location. And some parks are way more ahead of others, I would say, with
sure.
projects. We had like prescribed fire projects, develop in collaboration with local First Nations, and it's pretty much depending on probably like the proximity of those communities to the park and the link. And the thing is, for us in the East, at least in Quebec, I think the park is pretty much location. We know that like First Nation always use it that area, and
Sure.
we're kind of on the edge of the Atikamekw First Nation. With their community is mostly based further north of us,
Okay.
although their like historical land base was including the park. They were coming back, and even we have the Abenaki First Nation, who are mainly based south of Trois-Rivières on the south shore of St. Lawrence River, but they also had an influence in this area. We were kind of in a meeting point in the past, and if we go back, like even there has been like St. Lawrence Iroquoian people that were living along St. Lawrence River, the first strip of Cartier. So, and they were gone after the next time he came in North America. But
right, and
those guys, Iroquoian, there was lots of people living in Quebec City and Montreal at the first trip, and their life is based on like agriculture, like cultivating corn and squash and beans, and it's all based on fire, like slash and burn. So, but the thing is, we're going back so far away in the east compared to Western Canada. That's why it's so hard. And even
colonization hit pretty hard in the east.
Yeah,
really hard.
We're looking 450 years back. It's not 150 years like in Western Canada. So it's pretty difficult. But even then, we tried, when we do the renewal of our farm management plan, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we tried to get as much collect information, and we work with the historian from Abenaki First Nation to go over and try to seek trace of the use of fire, and there's limited information that get out of this, but I don't say it was a complete research. It's mostly based on stuff, written stuff, which we know that there's not too much, and probably not enough like interviews. But I remember attending one conference in Latuc, which is like a community north of the park, and there was this guy from Atikamekw First Nations, and he told me this story about it was in a coffee break. He told me this story about his father or grandfather that they were used to go and along that lake and burn a specific peninsula, an area. So I said, "Oh yeah, so you were burning to go and pick blueberries?" He said, "No, we're not allowed to go back there. We're burning for black bear. We're like building berries, like a good berry crop for the black bears, and then we're only going for black bear hunting."
Right.
And this is right in the Boreal. This is north of the park, but
right.
And this is just one little story about
one example. Yeah,
one example of those memories of those guys. That okay, so if we could dig a bit more, and I'm sure there's probably a lot more of those things, but it's going back so far far back in the history that's pretty difficult. And this is something we're slowly starting to make the connection with the community to develop that.
Yeah. No, it is. It's a difficult thing, right? Like there's a lot of bad feelings, right? There's a lot of it's a very emotional thing, and I'm sure it's very difficult to get as government, right, to get First Nations to open up, right? Because like historically that didn't go well. So it was more of just an interesting opportunity, I think, right? And I think, like you said, right? I think starting to change the culture within government and get those, and whether or not it needs to be changed, I don't know. That's not what I meant, but from the past, right? That this type of knowledge is valuable, and like you said, right? Like, oh yeah, we used to burn this area for blueberries, not for ourselves, but for bears, so that we can have bear meat and skins and tallow and stuff. And the knowledge of fire with Indigenous people was, if it's still intact in the communities nearby or can be reinvigorated, it was so ingrained in their culture, right? That I can't imagine that there isn't opportunity there but I understand, especially the political difficulties and the tensions difficulties of trying to trying to do this in a good way, right? It's a hard thing to do, and it's exciting for me to hear someone like yourself clearly has thought about this, right? And you're clearly like, yeah, this would be cool. How do we do this? How do we accomplish this? It's an entirely different. There's a lot going on, but I do see that there is a resurgent of it coming up, and even in communities where that knowledge maybe has been lost, there are people who are coming back in and reinvigorating it and reteaching and doing it in the way that they would do it. So I would love to see a big push nationally for more of this to happen, right? And it seems like it's kind of coming about of its own accord. But
I think it's coming busy. It's part of the conversation, like it wasn't the case like even 5 years ago. There's a huge difference, and I think there will be opportunities even for us, even for the East, to try to share and start conversation, and like we could be like I see us Parks Canada even being a way to promote those conversations and put them back in the. And we also, like every parks, we have like what we call the fire management plan. We always had tried to incorporate like traditional, like First Nation knowledge in the plans, but it's going to become even more important now with those cultural burning and this. So this will take a bigger space in our fire management plan. And so Mauricie will have to renew his plan like in a few years, and that will be probably an excellent opportunity to promote this and go and meet with our neighbors and sit and have those discussion and see how we can contribute and collaborate and offer or help and learn from what they were, because we knew that they were using it. So it just so long time ago for us in the East that it's difficult, but it's there. I mean, like, this is just by one conversation around a coffee. I've heard about that, so it's there. It's just you have to bring it back, and it's probably anyway happening because it's happening everywhere else. So it's gonna happen. It's probably happening in our communities around here too.
Well, and through the discussions that I've had as someone who is totally like, I'm just learning about cultural fire, good fire, right? I'm just learning about it myself the last few years. But through the conversations I've had with some of these groups like Gathering Voices or Fire Sticks Alliance in Australia, who are very active in getting cultural burning back in the land in Australia, the thing that they come up against always is resistance in government, right? But the thing they always say was that all it took was one person, one ally in government who was just listening, right? That person doesn't have to know everything or be some kind of enlightened being to figure. They just need someone who cares and is listening, and it worked out well, right? And I think those people like yourself, right, who are clearly open to the idea and willing to listen and learn, and like you said, right, like you said, there's opportunity on both sides here for you guys to learn from them and them to learn some stuff from you, because like you said, it's been gone for a while, and it's just a really exciting and cool way to go about this, right? Because you guys are trying to get fire back on the landscape, or you have been doing it for 30 years successfully, and now there's more opportunity for more integration. So I was just interested where your head was at. I don't know what's going on in Quebec as far as that, so it's really cool to hear that you guys are open to that, and that it's something that's clearly, it's on the docket, right? It's hopefully it's something that'll become more and more prevalent, and we can support First Nations while also getting back healthy ecosystems, right? It's good.
Oh, exactly. And I think it's one of the, like, not the only one of the best, like, subject or way that we can have a connection, because we look at we want the same at the end. I mean, and it's not about us teaching how to do fire. This is not what we're speaking about. It's like us listening to how they were using it and try to integrate some of that in our practice of, and even maybe in some areas where there is opportunities to do project jointly if possible, or so it's about like conversation, and it's a good starting point to reconciliate and talk to each other and do things together and learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Build a relationship, right?
Yep.
A working relationship that benefits everybody. Absolutely. That's awesome. I'm excited to see that type of stuff come about. So, what has been the response? Actually, Elisabeth, if you want to unmute yourself, I want to get to the public's response. We spoke earlier about how the public response very early on was standoffish and a little bit like, what the hell are we doing here? Maybe can you talk about that a little bit and how that's changed over time and what it's like, what the public response is like now?
Well, I arrived in the program in 2016.
Okay.
So at first, my perspective at that time was like, oh, wow, it's so cool. We're putting fire back. And I think at first it was the message that we wanted to pass, and to get the attention of the public to look at that. It's so cool. We're putting back the fire. And I think, you have people you have two kind of public. You have the people who said, oh, this is cool. And you have the people who said, oh my God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who don't even know people don't even know the natural role of fire. So at first, when I arrived in the program, we just, we were talking a lot about the operation and, what it's, how we are doing a prescribed fire. And we realized with the years that, people are not there. Just, we need to talk about the fire and the natural role of the fire. And when you talk about this, people are really more engaged and they really understand, oh, okay, that's why you're putting back the fire. When people realize that there's a natural role, fire, it's like the wind, it's like the snow, it's like a storm, so you cannot stop the storm. You cannot stop the wind. So you cannot stop the fire.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. Nice work.
Yeah. So, and slowly you explain that, we're putting back the fire. So, but in a safe way. And, I can say that, when people don't, sorry about my English.
Your English is great. No problem.
I was 3 years in Montreal in a super big science festival, and I was talking with people, meeting like 3,000 people in 3 days. And 90% of the people who I talked to, doesn't even know what was the role of the fire. And just after we talk, I think 100% of the people was saying, oh, this is cool, and now I understand, and you guys do a good job. So the perception of the public, it's usually it's they understand, and the public of the park, they are used to it, after all those years. But we always have new publics. It's a never ending job. It's not like, okay, now 100% of the people, will understand. No, it's not the way it works. So we always have to renew the messaging but through the years, we pass from the message of operation is cool and look at those firefighters and we slowly try to be more like, okay, what's the objective? Look at the benefits,
Yeah, benefits. Yep.
Benefits. Look at the benefits and, so yeah. So I can say that people usually, when you explain to the public, they understand and they support the program.
Right.
But you always have a portion of the people who don't like, the landscape after the fire. Usually, a couple of years ago, we were doing more prescribed fire in the backcountry of the park. So it was always remote and nobody saw it. But now, like last year and 2 years ago, I think, we did some prescribed fire just on the road of the park. So it's a very... there's a lot of people going through this road, and we have a lot of people on Facebook who said, oh, you should cut those trees. It's not, it's not beautiful anymore. And so you have to to explain again that it's natural, and you have insects like you said. We have new birds who benefits from the burnt trees, and so no, we're not cutting those trees. And so, and on the park we put a lot of we have panel board, we have interpreters, we have a lot of stuff to explain to the public. But yeah, so it's a lot of work in the term of communication, and there's a lot of sensitivity, and we always work with, even in La Mauricie, we some years we cannot talk about the fire because there was fire in the western part of the country. So we are a big agency, so
yeah, absolutely.
So we have to work with its sensitivity, and it's not it's a sensitive subject, and
of course.
So, and I understand that we don't like fire. We don't like our we don't want our house to burn. So, and we have to think about it when we think about people, and because I can understand why people are afraid of the fire, but if you explain to them in a natural way, I think it's easy to understand for the public. But yeah, I hope it's clear. I hope my message is clear.
Very clear. No, it is a shocking. We still see that issue today, right? With people in the eastern slopes here in Alberta that are just outside of the park, right? Where people see fire and harvesting and that kind of thing, and they're just devastated by the fact that this mature forest is gone. Like, well, listen, this is what we need. We need more young forests. We don't have enough. This is too homogeneous. But it is shocking to see, especially if you get like a really intense fire that takes out not just the understory, but the overstory as well. Yeah, like people hate that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look good.
Exactly.
At first, right?
And when you say, sometimes the message is clear, like, okay, we need our old forests are so beautiful. Right. Okay. But the message to make people understand that we need young forests, it's not so clear, and it's not so simple. So, how you try to make it simple to explain, quickly to the public. Yeah, it's old forest. Yeah, it's beautiful, but we need new forests too. And so my message in La Mauricie, it's like a family. We need like kids, we need adults, we need grandparents. In La Mauricie, we just have like grandparents. Yeah. Or like adults. Where are the kids?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we try to put more kids in the forest for the generation to come.
I like that. That's good. You're pretty good at metaphors for someone who thinks their English isn't very good. It's pretty good. You're doing well. But I have, there's a gentleman here, David Anderson. He works for FRI Research, which was one of the original what did they call it again? It was called one of the original research forests of the Canadian government from a while back. But he put out a whole thing a while back, a few years ago, and it was kind of tongue in cheek, right? It was like, how much old forest is too much? Right? And of course you put that on social media and it gets a lot of hate, right? A lot of people respond with how much no forest is too little kind of stuff, right? But it was a tongue in cheek thing. He was basically saying like, listen, there is old growth. Yes. We need it. Absolutely. It's part of the equation. But what about mature growth? What about intermediate growth? What about very young and completely, what about grasslands? What about, we need all of these things to support everything. But yeah, as human beings, we like to romanticize the big old trees. Like that is the epitome of biodiversity and health, but that's not true. It's part of the equation, the same as the small little seedling that's 3 centimeters off the ground. It's ultimately just as important. It's just that not as cool to look at. But yeah, I'm with you. That public perception thing of trying to balance it, right? Trying to get people to understand that, no, this is a balancing act. We need everything. And right now we have too much of one thing and we need to even this out. I think that's the same problem that the rest of Canada and probably the rest of the world, I would think, is dealing with, right? So, but yeah, it's interesting to see that all you've had to, like, that by providing those answers, like putting them out there, you feel like the public is catching on, and you're getting some positive response to the work that you're doing, because that is a challenge, right?
Yeah, and there's also the bringing back the role of the fire in the forest.
Yes.
We see fire as like we suppress fire. We need to, we have the C15. C'est ça,
yep.
le C15?
CL215.
CL215, it's very impressive and it's so cool. And why are you guys why are you putting back the fire when, we have all those operation of suppressing fire? So it's kind of, and we are doing, and when we do prescribed fire, we always do it when there's like a fire ban somewhere.
Right. People are like, hey, what the hell?
Sometimes it's, what the hell?
you can have a fire, but I can't have a campfire to roast marshmallows? Yeah.
Exactly. Why are you doing this? And so you have to explain again. And so it takes a lot of patience.
Yes. And it's never ending, right? You said, right?
It's a never ending process, but the more people know it, the more public is aware. So I think it's going pretty well, but now on our Facebook page, we have so much people that it's always like the public is always increasing, but yeah.
Yeah. It needs to become part of the culture, right? Like it needs to become part of Canadian culture, and like we need to understand it and just know that like fire is as much a part of it as the beautiful grizzly bear or the Rocky Mountain sheep or the whatever, right? Like we need all of these things, and fire is crucial, and it's a piece that's been missing.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. No, that's cool to hear I think you're right though. From my own perception is that it seems like the public are starting to understand, just through the pure volume of fire information they're getting through bad fires, they're starting to pay attention to the stuff about good fire, right? So yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So Michel, this whole process has been clearly a huge learning experience for you and for the government and for everyone. What do you guys think? What kind of lessons have you guys learned here that you think can be applied to elsewhere in the country or even the world? What kind of advice would you give to people if they're looking to do something like this, a prescribed burning project like this, that it seems like is kind of being done at a scale and at a focus that is pretty unique to North America, or at least to Canada, I should say?
I think the main one would be first get the basis knowledge you need, like get the understanding of the fire regime, the landscape you have,
the history. Yeah,
history, and learn how to use fire. Start small, don't start big right at the beginning, and be prepared to fail, or not necessarily fail, but do not get exactly what you were expecting. Right. Be prepared that you'll have to maybe it will take years to burn a specific unit, and more important, don't assume you're going to see the result next year or in 5 years, and that's a big one. Like, if we are talking about the objective of opening the canopy, okay, that's an easy one. Like, you will get it like year after. You can go and look at the satellite imagery or whatever. There's all kind of fancy technical tools now to do it, like not even need to fly over. But when you're looking at objectives of tree regeneration, the white pine, those trees, they live like 500 years.
Right. So
do not expect, even in your career, maybe to see the final results, because it's
unless you're going to be 500 years old. Yeah.
So just those are not insects, they are not fish, they are not like animals. They are trees. They are whole like long living trees. So it will take time to see the result, and all kind of stuff can happen. So being patient and make sure that people around like are not expecting results immediately. That's something else. Like okay, they give you money to do that and all that, and they want to see results. They would like to see how many stems per hectare, but no, I mean, it may take 30 years to see that. It's not something where it's not in human nature to wait so long to. And a good chance it won't be perfect. So to be adaptive, to be ready to be adaptive, to change, try something else, and make sure that if you start a program and you're expecting to be able to prove in 5 years that it's working and it's fine, that won't happen.
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah, we're not very good at the long game. Hey, we're very short term. Like even just the baseline thing, people are like, well, I want the forest of my childhood. That's what I would like. That's what's perfect for me. And it's like, well, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
So just we need to try and make sure that expectations are not too high. And like I said, just by bringing back the fire in the landscape where where you've made the demonstration and you have science to back up and showing that fire was used to have a role there, and it's pretty much all ecosystem in North America, I would say. Like a few exceptions if you go really far in the north, but pretty much everything burned in that continent for thousands of years. So you won't be wrong. I mean, we've demonstrated with the insect. This is not something you're going to measure all the time. You cannot monitor everything. No. It's just that something you won't be able to do. So, but you won't fail by bringing back fire in the landscape, and because we know there has been a variety of intensity and roles, so you won't be wrong. But this is something you have to sell and make sure people understand. And I think that's the main thing. Like you need a bit of humility. You will do something, and probably somebody else in his career will see the result, and likely we're lucky. There's few sites we did burn it. That site we burned in 95. That burnt over a month and a half, and we go back there now, and they are not like super big trees. I mean, the regeneration. There are some trees about like getting close to 4 inches in diameter, and like maybe 5-6 meters height, which is pretty cool. But I'll be done next spring, and maybe if I go back in 10 years, they will be 10 inches in diameters. Right. But I won't see those big pine with the cracked bark and like 2 feet in diameters. Never. My grandchildren may be able to see it. So you just you do your little piece of it, and and just be adaptive, be ready to fail, and try something else, and try to back you up on science. Try to do good science and monitor, but do not expect to be able to answer all the questions.
Yeah, it's the ultimate in I'm doing this for the future, and I'm not going to see the benefit of this, right? It's the ultimate in removing the ego and just like, hey, we're going to try some stuff. Hopefully it's the right thing to do. This is what we know and understand now, and we'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, you just have to, just got to try. Just got to try.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's a lot more to learn when you fail than when you succeed. I mean, this is where and when we learn stuff in the past 30 years, that program is when we fail to do something, and it's okay, let's change that. If you succeed right from the beginning, you don't even know why you're succeeding. So
we did something right. Yeah.
We don't know, but by understanding why it's not working, this is when you're in how it works afterward. So that's great. And this is and we have a couple of it's really when you go and see I remember we have one stand in the park. It's something unknown, and you can see it from a lake. You can canoe and everybody see it, but you really have to go. It's just beside the lake. It's not an easy access, but it's about 30 hectares. That's a big pine. And first time I've been there with my colleague Raymond Canville, which is he retired now, but I start all this program with him, and we kind of build it's a team. It's more than just us, but like we're both at the beginning who developed that. And I was there with Raymond in snowshoes in winter, and we entered that like stand of pine that we're seeing it for years.
Yeah.
And those trees, we took samples, and some are 250 years old and even close to 400. Yeah. And that's only when you get into that you realize, okay, oh wow, there's something different. So, and there's not so much of those forests remaining. It's even in Quebec now, there's something like that. It's quite amazing. And it could have been logged. It has escaped logging for whatever reason.
Got lucky. Yep.
Yeah. So when you see something like that, it's okay. We're working to make sure that maybe in 200 years, some of the patches we've burned will look like this one. So that's awesome. Pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it's cool to have that context. Like, oh, this is possible here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the efforts that you are putting in now will result in more of that. And it's just cool to have that difference, that diversity, right? Well, awesome, folks. That was good. I really enjoyed that. It was interesting to get the details behind all this. I think there's lots for people to learn here, lots of good information about trying, failing, succeeding, learning, all this good stuff. It was awesome. So I appreciate your guys' time. Thanks so much, both Michel and Elisabeth. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I learned a bunch, lots of cool stuff going on there. Super interesting to see and hear about a different part of the country and how they tackle the challenges, and how the challenges they have are completely different than our own in a lot of ways, right? So it's really, really cool. And I wish them luck. I hope the cultural burning part comes in at some point. I hope they can see some collaboration there. I'm sure there's lots to gain. I hope that can happen. And I hope that they just have a lot of success in bringing fire back on. So thanks a lot, Michel. Thanks a lot, Elisabeth. It was great to talk to you guys. You guys were awesome. Thanks a lot for listening, folks. If you have any questions, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. I'll get back to you. Catch you next time. Take it easy.